Can we?
You're live.
Okay. Welcome to today's Planning Committee on the 28th of October. This is a special meeting to look at the Manor Road application. There's only one application on this agenda, so we will give it the time it requires for us to look at it. First of all, can I welcome members of the public? Please, you can view what's happening and you'll be able to see how the committee is run. Item 1 is apologies and absence. I don't think I have any apologies, but there is a substitution. Councillor Tariq Mahmood had a personal reason to miss this meeting, and Councillor Ray Wall is substituting on his behalf. So, Councillor Wall, you there? Yes? Okay, I think he's muted, but Councillor Wall is in the meeting and has joined us and has access to all the papers. Second, there are urgent matters. There are no urgent matters that I've been informed of. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest from any members of the committee? No. Okay. There are no matters to be considered in private. Can we approve the minutes or to follow? I'm not sure the minutes are there, are they? Katie?
Chair, it's been agreed that the minutes will be considered at the next meeting.
Yes.
Committee.
Okay. So there would be no, I agreed that there would be no site visit for this item. And we then move on to the main application, which is 51 to 56 Manor Road and 53 to 55 Drayton Green Road, West Ealing. So could I ask the officer to please introduce the item?
Chair,
yes, thank you.
Chair, sorry, Councillor Packett, just before we begin, Chair, obviously there was a discussion last night about the principle of tall towers, which clearly this application is. Most of us recused ourselves from that debate and abstained in the vote. I just think it might be wise, just for those who did take part in that debate, to confirm they are approaching the application tonight with an open mind and would be willing to vote for or against it, depending on how the vote went. Just to be clear for those watching that we are approaching this without any predetermination of any sort.
Councillor Black, I agree with you, but I've given them the option to declare any interests. They've chosen not to declare any interest, so I'm assuming they don't feel that they have anything to declare. It really is a matter for them individually as to whether they have an interest or whether they've got a predetermined position. If they have, that will be a difficulty that we would have to face, but they've not indicated in any way that they have that. So I'm really in their hands. The people who took part in the debate need to.
Chair, could I know this is a different matter. Could I get a point of clarification about people contacting us on our private addresses? Because I've had communication from both the developer and also from Stop the Towers at my personal home address. And I think that that's unacceptable, considering most council papers come through the town hall. So could I get some clarification as to what happened there?
Okay, could our legal advisor give us some advice as to whether that's applicable, whether that can happen or not?
It depends on how those who contacted councillors came by the information, and I don't have information as to whether or not that was already in the public domain or whether it came to them in that may give rise to some breach data protection issues.
My personal address is out of bounds. It's not in the public domain, or should not be in the public domain, which is why I'm raising this.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, but I don't have the information as to how that it came to be known. So I think all we can say is for today's purposes that we'll take that away. It doesn't affect the ability of the committee to consider the application. So if you don't mind, we'll take that away and look at it separately.
I'd be really grateful if you could, for future meetings, give us some kind of structure on what the do's and don'ts are with that, because I have to say I'm not very impressed with things coming through my letterbox when they're not supposed to.
Yes, yeah, and that's understood, and I'm sure those listening who may have found your address by one means or another will note that, and certainly the council wouldn't support that, but we'll investigate outside this meeting what's happened.
Okay, Councillor Razor, is that helpful? They'll have a look at that and they'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. Okay,
so we move on to the main item, 55 West. I think Katie Crosby is the officer responsible. So would you please present your report?
Okay, the front title page.
Yes, we're on the main page, yes.
All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Crosby and I am the case officer for this application. The proposal under consideration this evening is for a residential-led mixed-use development at the corner of Manor and Drayton Green Roads in West Ealing. Okay, just moving on to the next slide. The site is adjacent to the new West Ealing Crossrail station, which is this building here, and it's also an allocated development site within the local plan. The site is also located within the Ealing Metropolitan Town Centre. Okay, moving on. To gain an understanding of the site, the next few slides I'm going to show are the images of the site and the immediate surrounds. So this image here shows an aerial view of the site with Waitrose to the south here, south of the railway tracks, and then you've got Argyle Road and the avenue to the north. Okay, next slide. This perspective view looks east towards Ealing Broadway in the distance here, and it also shows the general scale of development surrounding the site. On the larger developments, you have Waitrose and Luminosity Court here, which is 10 stories in height. You have Sinclair House here, which is 8 stories, Dominion House behind it, which is 13 stories, and behind this is another development site which has planning permission for a 14-story development. And also on this image in this site here, this is another allocated development site. To the north of the site, which is this area here, you can see the 3 to 4 story residential development along Argyle Road, and then also the 2-story terraced housing that's typical of the wider residential parts of this location, which is around here. Okay, so these images here just provide another perspective looking northwest. So the application site here is A, same in this one here. It's again looking east towards Ealing Broadway. This here is another perspective. So it gives you another, I guess, another appreciation of the residential developments. So this is the residential areas around here. So you've got the 2-story terrace housing and then the larger 3 to 4 story along Argyle Road here. The next image I'm going to show is at the street level. So just to get a bit of orientation, I'm going to show an image standing on the railway overbridge here, looking east towards Ealing Broadway, an image at the junction here of the avenue and Argyle Road looking towards the development site, and another one on Manor Road looking east on the development site. Okay, so these are the images here. So, oops, 1, 2, 5. So in these images also, this is the site here. So it's these buildings here, and as you can see, it wraps around the corner onto Manor Road. So in these images, you can see the partly rundown condition of the site, and that they're largely an ad hoc collection of single-story buildings. Okay, so the scheme itself would have 2 flexible use commercial units on the ground floor. So these are shown here and also here as well. On the upper stories, you will have 144 homes. All of these homes would be affordable with 50 London Living rented units. This would be 35% of the overall, and 94 shared ownership homes, which would be 65%. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to draw members' attention to an error in the committee report referring to 70%. The shared ownership portion is 65%. Okay, Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing Association would be the registered social landlord, and should planning permission be granted, they have committed to entering into a nominations agreement with the council. This would ensure that those on Ealing's housing register would benefit from the proposed housing. Council officers consider the offer acceptable, subject to the standard early stage review mechanism. The application has attracted a significant number of responses from residents and the general public. We've received 2,715 representations. 55 of these are in support of the scheme, with the remaining objecting. These objections cover a number of matters that have been reviewed and discussed in the committee report. However, the overwhelming concern is the height and scale of the proposal and the impact this would have on the character of the area. So this graph here depicts the most frequent reason for objecting, so it's the height of the scheme, through to the least frequent reason. Objections have also been received from 8 community groups. Specifically, these are Ealing Civic Society, Five Roads Forum, the Drayton's Community Association, Gordon Road and Surrounding Streets Association, St Stephen's Conservation Area Advisory Panel, Stop the Towers, Central Ealing Residents Association, and Ealing Cycling Campaign. Objections have also been received from James Murray MP, Virendra Sharma MP, and Rupa Huck MP, as well as Cleveland Ward Councillors Linda Burke, Sitara Anjum, and also on behalf of Councillor Carlo Laswati. The matters raised in these objections have been addressed in the committee report and briefing notes. With respect to the key matters of consideration, the principle of residential-led mixed-use development in this location is acceptable, and as discussed previously, the affordable housing offer is also acceptable. The proposed development would be taller than is typical of the low-rise residences in the surrounding area. However, the scale and height has been designed to integrate with a cluster of tall and large buildings in the vicinity, forming a corridor towards Ealing Broadway. As a standalone building and within this group of buildings, this reinforces the spatial hierarchy of this metropolitan town centre location as a main centre of activity, and it also provides a visual reference point for this important Crossrail station interchange. Care has also been taken to ensure the architectural quality, with specific attention paid to the base of the building, to enable wide tree-lined pavements to improve the public realm and to reactivate the commercial frontage. The use of strong vertical and horizontal articulation in the building form and facade creates proportions and a lightness of materials that seeks to reduce the appearance of bulk. The siting, scale and design is therefore acceptable on this designated development site. An assessment of the impact on residential neighbours has also been carried out, and there would be no undue loss of privacy or sunlight and daylight impacts. The scheme would also effectively manage and mitigate the reasonable impacts of the existing railway operations. In terms of the quality of the accommodation, the layout of the proposed dwellings is well designed and the private and communal spaces are supported. Okay, this image on the screen before members shows the proposal in the backdrop of the avenue over 200 metres away. Luminosity Court can also be seen in the background with no impact on the conservation area. This image is a wireline in the committee report, but it's been rendered following consultation responses. So it's been in the briefing notes, this image. The avenue is a significant road in the St Stephen's conservation area, which makes up the majority of its character. So the impacts on the conservation area have been assessed, and despite the building being taller than surrounding development, it's concluded that there would be less than substantial harm to the character, which would be outweighed by the public benefits. The office's recommendation to committee is to grant approval. As has been clarified in the briefing notes, there are some departures from the local plan. Specifically in relation to a plan-led approach to the siting of tall buildings, exceeding the density matrix in the adopted London plan, not providing social rented or London rented affordable housing, lack of provision of on-site disabled parking, and a shortfall in communal garden space required by Ealing's Development Management DPD. However, officers have robustly considered the scheme, which is in substantial accordance with the plan, as explained in the committee report. The tall building is considered acceptable in its context, and therefore the departure from the development plan is given limited weight in the overall planning balance assessment. Likewise, the design-led approach to density accords with the provisions of the intend to publish London plan, as does the provision of outdoor amenity space. It is also noted that a financial contribution towards local park amenities would be provided to offset the shortfall in on-site provision. 3 on-street parking spaces would be usable by blue badge holders, and a step-free access to the new Crossrail station would provide mobility impaired residents with the option to travel by train. On balance, officers do not see any reason for refusal and consider the scheme to represent a good example of optimisation, balancing policy, amenity and site constraints, while also maximising the delivery of good quality affordable housing. I would also just like to draw members' attention to the briefing notes, which details representations received since the publication of the committee report, including a detailed response to the addendum representation received from Stop the Towers. The briefing notes also provide clarification on the GLA Stage 1 response and more details on affordable housing. Thank you.
Okay. We have the objector. Is it Nicholas Grant?
Yes, Chair, that's right.
Sir,
I'm here speaking for Stop the Towers.
Yeah, you'll have 3 minutes, sir. So please, when you're ready, please start.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to start with a quick correction to the note that I put in earlier. The heading refers to an 18-storey building, but of course this is 18 stories on top of a double height ground floor, so this is a 20-storey building with bits on top. You've received our letters dated 27th of October highlighting the issues we have with the officer's report and whether it's clear enough that the committee can grant permission on the back of that. I understand that from the presentation you've just received that that's been responded to, although I'm afraid I've not seen that, so can't respond to the response. However, I'd like to flag the following points. First, nobody in STT is disputing the principle of redevelopment on the site. The question is whether the site, this development is acceptable, not whether that redevelopment at all is. Second, this development is contrary to the development plan, and that is the starting point. The officer's report confirms that, although the briefing you've just heard says that it's substantially in accordance with the plan, so we now find ourselves a little confused, at least at STT. The GLA's report in August says that the development does not comply with the IPLP. Again, there appears to have been some further points made by the planning officer, which again, I'm afraid I've simply not seen. The officer's report states that nevertheless, material considerations require granting permission. The officer's report itself does not expand on those, save for the affordable housing point, which I'll come back to below. STT, along with 2,500 other people, do not agree that permission should be granted. This is fundamentally a tall building. It's in an area which is not allocated for tall buildings, and at 20-odd stories, it's more than twice the size of Sinclair House, a third taller than Dominion House, which is itself hidden from view, and double the size of Luminosity Court, Waitrose. It is orders of magnitude taller than the majority of building other residential units in the area, and it can't be said to be in a cluster of tall buildings as it's the only tall building. We say the others are at best mid-rise. The effects of this have felt keenly by the local residents, as the scale of responses you've received shows. For the people who live and work in the area and will see this development day after day, they don't agree that the development complements or fits with the area. The development will dominate it. This is even more of an issue when one looks to the St Stephen's Conservation Area, a heritage asset which you must give particular weight to protecting. STT submits, as do many others, that this will harm its setting. How could it not? It's a 20-storey edifice, circa 200 metres away, less if the conservation area is extended. The officer's report downplays this by arguing that it only affects the conservation area from one view and relies on a particular photo. That was a wireframe model, but it's now been filled in, but we submit this is still deficient on 2 fronts. First, the point of a conservation area is to protect the area, not one view in the area. And second, that photo should show the picture in winter, not just summer. We make other submissions, which I can't repeat here, but we come against that background to affordable housing. Ealing has a shortfall. The vast majority of that is required for those who can't afford London living rent. This development...
Wind up, 3 minutes are up.
Oh, sorry, I was referring to the timer on the screen, which is at 13 seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry, well, the timer on my screen came to 0. Okay, just wind up.
I see. The simple point is this isn't in accordance with the 60-40 split, and for reasons that we've already prefaced in the letter, to save time I won't refer to, we don't think it's acceptable legally, morally, or as a matter of good planning to now rely on that. It's not the silver bullet. In light of that difference in time, I'll leave it there, Chair. You've had our more detailed submissions.
All right. So for the applicant, I think we don't have a speaker, but we do have a film or a 3-minute film. So could we have that played? There's no sound.
Sorry, Chair, bear with me just a moment. I'll have to try and get the audio sorted. I won't be a moment.
This is a joint application between Southern Grove and Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing Association to deliver a 100% affordable residential scheme. This application follows our first successful joint venture at the former BHS on Ealing Broadway, which delivers 137 affordable homes later this year. The site is located in the Metropolitan Town Centre, making it one of the most accessible sites in London, adjacent to the new West Ealing Crossroads station. The scheme, designed by award-winning architects at DMWR, incorporates the highest standards of architecture throughout to make optimal use of a highly accessible site in need of significant regeneration. The scheme has been developed over the past 3 years, taking on board comments from the public consultation, Ealing Council and the GLA. Our latest design includes a 7-storey reduction in height to provide a double height ground floor unit with 18 floors of residential above. We feel this is more appropriate following our extensive design analysis by our team. The ground floor consists of 2 flexible commercial units, whilst the upper floors are wholly residential, comprising of 144 affordable units. All units meet or exceed London Plan space standards, and each flat has their own private amenity space. Additionally, there is a roof terrace which is in excess of 250 square metres. This will be accessible to all residents. The development is designed to be car-free and provides 3 spaces along the southern carriageway of Manor Road, all of which can be used by blue badge holders. Our car-free commitment is confirmed in agreed wording in the Section 106 document with Ealing Council. This is to ensure no residents will be able to apply for a parking permit. The development accords with policy and has been robustly assessed and tested in terms of key environmental and technical assessments, including daylight, sunlight, overshadowing, wind, overheating, townscape and heritage. As such, we consider the scheme fully responds to the analysis and policy position and is therefore suitable for this development.
Our application is aimed at helping local people on modest incomes who cannot operate effectively within the private sector. 55 West will provide 50 London living rented homes, which allows access to a heavily subsidised rent for up to 10 years, facilitating a genuine opportunity to reduce excessive housing costs and save towards a deposit. This is a tenure that will change the lives of those trapped in the private rented sector and give them a real opportunity to access home ownership in the future. Additionally, the proposed scheme will deliver 94 affordable shared ownership homes. Shared ownership is a product that allows access to home ownership for those who cannot afford to buy outright in the private market due to a lack of income or insufficient deposits. Our assumptions agreed with council officers ensure housing costs are kept between 70 and 80% of market rented levels, making this a viable home ownership option for modest gross household incomes. a product that we believe is ideal for local, hard-working key workers with aspirations of home ownership. We'd like to thank you for listening this evening and considering our proposals, which we are proud to present. We hope you are minded to approve this application so we can continue working together to deliver the much needed affordable homes across the borough.
Okay. Linda, would you like to go first, or would you want
Sure.
James to go
No,
first?
I'm happy to go first. Yeah.
Okay, Linda, you have
Okay.
5 minutes.
Okay. I'm speaking as one of Cleveland's ward councillors to urge you to reject this scheme on the basis it doesn't meet the London plan and it doesn't meet our own London Borough of Ealing's planning requirements as stated by the officer. The design and density are completely unsuitable for the area and don't meet our planning requirements. There is lack of any real social affordable housing, which again doesn't meet planning requirements, and the consideration is premature. We're in the process of setting up design review panels and local plans, all of which have been heralded by the council and the leader and enthusiastically received by residents. Therefore, to put this development for approval before this is premature and against our own process. A bit more detail. There is no social rent provision. The council's own processes say that every large development should have social rent. This has only got the intermediate housing officer, and we could set a really poor precedent if, particularly in areas of high value like this, we say it's okay to have no social rent, which is the greatest need for our residents. Intermediate is too expensive for many of our residents. You need to earn between 44 and 67,000. As a nurse, I know that many key workers can't afford that. The average income in Ealing is 31,000. So this will really only suit a very small percentage of our residents. Shared ownership. I've been on a number of London-wide groups as a nurse, as a representative. And shared ownership is, we have stated as Ealing Council, its limited value as a product for our residents for good reason. In areas like this where you have high inflation, the price is set at the price of the market rent of the area. And what will happen here as soon as Crossrail opens is it will be really expensive. So very, very soon, as soon as these are sold on, what will happen is they will be no longer affordable to key workers, or they will end up owning such a small percentage, it will be of no value to them. In fact, evidence is that very, very few people in areas of high inflation like this end up owning their own home. As recent estimates have said as few as 10%. Remember, they pay full legal fees, full stamp duty and full charges, even though they own a tiny percent. They also are at the mercy of the landlord in the sense that they have to pay 100% maintenance and repair costs. And if the leaseholder decides to increase the rent and service charges, there's nothing they can do. We could find in a few years that this is no longer an intermediate product. So design and density, that's been talked about already, but we seem to always see high density as tall. And our own planning requirements stated that this area was unsuitable for a building of this height, even though there was going to be a Crossrail station there. It's because it's a low-rise residential area with a few small buildings less than half this height and a strong, diverse local community, completely unsuitable for this kind of tall building. It's also premature. As I say, we are setting up, and as the officer said, we are setting up review panels, and these tall buildings should be discussed with residents and should be in development plans. That's part of our own process, and yet what are we doing? We're overriding our own process again and saying it doesn't matter. We will, and this has implications for all the design review panels and for all the local planning. It will be seen as hypocritical and tokenistic. In conclusion, since I've become a local councillor, I've never had so much correspondence or so much concern, and virtually everybody has said they want a development here. They believe it should have more social housing. They rightly believe it's just the wrong kind of development. There is a perception amongst the residents of Ealing that councillors will vote to approve any tall building, and this one doesn't meet our own planning requirements, as stated by the officer. This is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that we consider each development on its own merits and can discriminate between those that are good and meet the needs of our residents and those that clearly, as this does, do not. So please reject this, because as our policy says, it's too soon to be making a decision about a tall building in this area, because we do not have a development plan here, as Katie has said. Our own council planning documentation, and I can refer you to it, says this is the wrong area to have a tall building, and it should be more compatible with the local area. Having 65% shared ownership in location where it will quickly become unaffordable is completely wrong. And last but most certainly not least, having no social genuinely affordable rent for 60% of our residents in such a large development goes against our planning policy, and if we ignore that, we ignore it at our peril in terms of setting a precedent. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Can I call on James Murray MP? Is he on the line? James, are you there? Ah, have we lost him, or I thought he had joined?
I did speak to him a little while ago, Chair, and he was going to try and join, but I'm not sure if he has done so or not.
Oh.
He seems to be in the chat, but his image isn't anywhere to be seen.
Chitel, he's here. He can see the screen, but he can't get himself heard. I've just rung him.
Oh, hang on, Chitel's just calling me then.
Okay, okay.
Has he come in as a member of the public rather than join us? Oh, that's James.
I think that's it. I think that's what's happened.
Katie, could you ring James Murray and talk him through how to get in?
Yes, no problem. I'll give him a call now.
Okay, I apologise to members of the public, but we do want to hear from the MP, so we're just going to wait for him to join us. I do apologise for the delay, but I don't really think we can carry on with the rest of the meeting until we actually hear from him, so we'll just wait.
James is going to dial into the meeting, so he should be with us in the next minute or two.
Okay.
Hello, this is James Murray. Can you hear me?
Yes, James, we can hear you now. So, James, normally we allow 5 minutes. This is James Murray, MP for Ealing North. So, James, whenever you're ready, you can start off. Yes?
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and apologies for the technical difficulties. I can see you but couldn't be heard. So thank you for allowing me to call in. I'm objecting to this application as someone who knows the site well, as the local Member of Parliament, as someone who grew up 10 minutes walk from the site, and as a resident who now lives 5 minutes walk away. But if you'd allow me to start very briefly by putting my comments today in their context before I address the specific planning reasons for my objection. Firstly, neither I nor people I have spoken to are against development of this site in principle. I and others overwhelmingly accept and indeed want the site to be redeveloped. However, we feel strongly and with good reason that the plans before us are wrong. Second, before becoming the MP for Ealing North, I was London's Deputy Mayor for Housing. In that role, I was also contacted by many residents about the previous version of the application for this site. As a result, I met with GLA planning officers last summer to discuss concerns relating to the original application about its height and design and the lack of any social rented housing. Despite amendments to the scheme, those same concerns still apply to the current application. And thirdly, whilst I appreciate committee members' determination to build more homes by consenting schemes that come before them, I would suggest that, as the Mayor of London has himself showed, it shows the value of putting final decisions on applications in the hands of elected members if, on occasion and when they have good reason, they go against officers' recommendations and reject applications for schemes that simply are not right. Now, to move on, in terms of my reasons for objecting to the plans, I would like to focus on 3 key planning policies set out in the draft New London Plan intent to publish version that I consider relevant to this application. First, despite the proposal offering 100% affordable housing, it is all intermediate tenure with no homes for social rent. Policy H6 of the draft plan clearly sets out the importance of developments including homes for social rent. I know I do not need to convince councillors of the overwhelming need for that tenure, which they will know well from their inboxes. The planning officer's report attempts to justify the entirely intermediate approach on the basis that Metropolitan is a strategic partner of the Mayor of London under his Homes for Londoners programme, which means that across Metropolitan's programme, some social housing will be delivered. However, I am concerned that the Homes for Londoners programme relates to funding allocation and is distinct from the portfolio approach taken in planning. To be absolutely clear, there is no way that committee members can have any certainty in planning terms that social rented homes will be delivered elsewhere. Second, I have fundamental concerns with the height and design of the development, given the surrounding area and context. In particular, I believe councillors should note policy D3 of the draft London Plan, which states that all development must make best use of land by following a design-led approach that optimises the capacity of sites, and that the optimum capacity for a site does not mean the maximum capacity. This application seeks crudely to maximise capacity, and it simply cannot credibly claim to follow a design-led approach, like, for example, responding to the existing character of the place. The design is unsympathetic to the nearby area, and its height ignores the relationship with other buildings in the emerging cluster, being more than double the height of its near neighbours. Furthermore, I have seen no evidence that the design has been reviewed in a way that I believe meets policy D4 of the draft London Plan, which emphasises the importance of a robust and transparent design review process. And finally, policy D9 is relevant in stating that tall buildings should only be developed in locations that are identified in development plans. The council admits in its report that this site is not explicitly allocated for a tall building within Ealing's development site DPD. It is crucial, in my view, that councillors step back and consider the wider impact that approving this application could have. It would undermine intentions by the council and the goodwill of the community to develop a coherent, well-designed master plan for the neighbourhood around West Ealing Station. I fear that approving this tower at this time will open the gates to new buildings across the area that will be hard to be proud of in years to come. In conclusion, I firmly believe this site should be developed, but I also firmly believe this proposal should be rejected. It is simply not acceptable to let them off building homes for social rent, and its design is fundamentally at odds with the local context. I believe there is an opportunity on this site and others near West Ealing Station to develop appropriate planning guidance that has good design, community involvement, and the right mix of affordable housing at its heart. I would humbly suggest this is the moment for councillors to take a step back, consider both the flaws of this application itself and the wider context that surrounds it, and make clear their position by rejecting this application.
Thank you. That was just in time. 2 seconds over or so. Okay, James. Katie, there's a number of issues being raised. So will you be taking them all, or will be some other officers taking some of the other issues raised? You're muted, Alex.
Apologies.
Okay.
Some matters will be responded by myself, Alex Jackson. I'm the Development Planning Manager, and some matters also by Katie Crosby. So we can come back on some of the points now, or
I think that would be helpful, because then it would stop questions being asked from members.
Sure.
So if you can try and clarify some of the issues raised, so
Okay.
members are aware.
Yes. Okay. A number of the representations to Planning Committee have focused on the key issues in relation to affordable housing and whether the proposals tonight comply with planning policy. Clearly, the scheme before committee isn't fully compliant with the adopted plan. However, we are also taking into consideration the intended to publish London plan policies as material considerations. Now, the affordability of the scheme, which my colleague from Housing will also will come back in with some further explanations about the affordability of it, that will follow. However, I would like to point out that policy H5 in the intend to publish London plan also recognises that schemes that provide over 75% affordable housing do have some flexibility in their 10-year split, and that decision is ultimately to the local authority and whether it considers what is actually being offered is truly affordable, genuinely affordable housing. So that is something that we've taken into great consideration in considering the proposals tonight. There is quite a lot of information in the officer's recommendation report about the affordability. Also, additional information contained in the briefing notes circulated earlier today, and also in the applicant's presentation, also to committee tonight, about the affordability breakdowns and the differences between London living rent and also London affordable rent. So in that respect, we have considered that, and we do consider that the 100% offer of shared ownership and 100% affordable housing with a combination of 65% shared ownership and 35% London living rent is in this case appropriate affordable housing. Just moving on to the allocation of the site and the suitability of a tall building in this context. That's obviously a theme that's running through a great number of the objection points and also speakers tonight. Whilst it's not specifically allocated for a tall building in our own adopted DPD document, there are policies within the intend to publish London plan which also suggest that sites should be maximised rather than optimised. In that regard, the officer's recommendation after significant assessment does not conclude that the site is being maximised. It rather is being optimized, and in this particular case it does involve a taller building, as has been explained in the recommendation. This is not out of context with the immediate area. There are clusters of buildings which have a variation in height. It's widely accepted that to the north the scale of buildings ranges from 2-storey to 4-storey, but within its immediate context, it is quite different. And in this regard, quite a detailed considerations have been made about the suitability, the appropriateness of a taller building, and in particular that its design. And after that full assessment, it's been concluded that the taller building in its entirety, its entire architectural design response is suitable in this particular location. Clearly, the representations conclude in a different manner, but I can assure you that delivering good design has been an enormous consideration in the overall assessment of this planning application. Just thinking about design review. Design reviews, yes, is very topical, and James Murray MP and Linda Burke have mentioned at the Council's commitment to formalise design review panels. We haven't had a formal panel yet. The Council has informally reviewed around 7 developments within 2 years, and the design reviews for those particular schemes have been on much larger scale developments. It's not to say that in the future, once the design review panels have been formalised, that those reviews would not be more routine. However, as schemes have been presented to Planning Committee, they haven't always been subject to a design review. And I must also point out that the design review process is about scrutinising the design and providing comments to the local planning authority, which would be taken into account in all the considerations of the application. So I think I picked up on the main matters. There will be other matters I will come back on in detail in relation to policies. I do think it would be relevant to invite David Baptiste to speak to the committee in relation to the affordable housing being offered. And I'll probably I'll just end there for them now.
Okay, Katie, have you got anything you want to add before I ask David to come in on the affordable housing?
I think the only other matter that was raised was with respect to the heritage, the impact on the conservation area, and the focus on the key view within the conservation area. It has been addressed in the briefing note, but just to go over it. So the St. Stephen's conservation area is principally, there's an image of it on page 31 of the committee report, and it's essentially it's a spine going it has a central spine that leads up to the St. Stephen's Church, and that spine is the avenue, and then it's the houses on either side of the avenue. That's the conservation area. So the focus on the view in the report and the image I showed just before is because that's part of the assessment in terms of that's the best way to get an understanding of the impact on the conservation area. So as you could see in that image, the building would be over 200 metres away. It sits comfortably in the backdrop of the scheme. So in that respect, we've concluded that the impact on the conservation area would be less than substantial and outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme.
Okay, David, he's our assistant housing director?
Not quite. I'm the head of housing development.
Okay, so could you talk us through the affordable housing offer and how you view it in terms of the council?
Okay, just to briefly explain my role, or substantial part of my role, please.
Oops, you've broken up, David. We can't hear you.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
My internet's playing up a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so negotiating affordable housing through the private sector, private developers, housing associations, and also our own council house building program where we directly build council homes and homes for affordable housing. So that's sort of a major part of my role. In terms of this scheme, it is what it is. It is an intermediate housing focused affordable housing offer. Affordable housing often draws wide debate, understandably, because there are nuances within that general term. What we would normally be facing here is a scheme where we would be negotiating the proportion of affordable housing would be a minimum of 35%. In this case, we agree that it's 100% because we would normally be starting with a private developer offering, looking to sell 65% of those homes on the open market. In this case, those homes are changed to shared ownership, but I'll come on to that in a moment. So we believe that this is an improved offer from what it would be from the private sector, but there's a housing association involved, so you would expect that. I certainly would. The shared ownership is geared towards there is a maximum set by the GLA in terms of incomes, and intermediate housing is in demand across London and is needed in Ealing as well. So the intermediate housing and shared ownership maximum income would be £90,000. That's kind of prescribed as a maximum. The incomes that are being targeted and pushed hard to get a reduction on that are between £44,000 and £67,000, but these are gross incomes and they are household incomes, so it's not difficult to imagine that two people may join together to purchase one of these homes, which would make it probably more affordable. The main point, I think, which I've picked up, is that this is not social housing, it's London Living Rent. And I can appreciate that it's a new tenure. It only really came into being in 2018, so it's not a familiar phrase or understanding with people generally. But just to bring it home, it's the intermediate tenure here in terms of the rented option, which is what it is initially, is £900 a month to £1,000 a month between a 1 and a 2 bed. But social rent, as that generic term we're using, would be almost £830 a month and £885. So the difference in terms of the rent you pay there is a difference, but I'd argue that it's not a significant difference if you're entering into housing, and this housing can be accessed by people on what we call our housing register. So they can be people in housing need, but they won't go through the route to be directly nominated as they would be in social housing, but they nonetheless would help to alleviate housing need in the borough. And I suppose the final point I'd make is that when we're looking at affordable housing and social rent in particular, which is the form of tenure that the current administration has pushed hard on, this is across the borough. So we look to push hard to deliver more social rent across the borough, and we believe we've made a significant inroad in that. So the council, the administration itself accepts London Living Rent alongside London Affordable Rent as genuinely affordable homes. In essence, we support this housing offer. I'm not talking about the whole scheme, I'm just talking about the affordable housing offer. I think that's probably enough from me at the moment, Chair.
Okay, David, thank you. I now move to members of the committee. If you've got any questions, first of all, please indicate. You can switch on your mics, because unless, I don't know.
We've all indicated by the chat.
I'm trying to get the chat on my thing, but I can't seem to get it.
I think it's the only practical way to do it, Chair, because there's
Yes,
no hand
I
function.
understand, but I'm just trying to see. I'm getting chat, but I'm getting old chat, so I don't quite understand.
You may be in the wrong. You may have clicked the wrong meeting there.
Well, I'm in the meeting, aren't I?
Yeah.
So I don't quite understand. For the moment, I'm afraid I don't quite.
So, well, Chris Summers was the first to indicate, if that's helpful.
Yep, that would be helpful. So, Chris, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, and Councillor Donnelly was after me, I think. Yeah, I think just from in the papers, I believe I read that the application was recommended for fast tracking by where the council believed it would be sort of suitable for fast track funding through the Greater London GLA, but that meant that it wasn't suitable for a viability study. So am I right in thinking that no viability study has been asked for or requested? We have no idea how much money it costs, or basically whether the figures we are being given are suitable. And also, just coming back on something that Dave Baptiste mentioned about, he was specifically mentioning the figures for social rent as compared with London living rent, but I'm just trying to clarify London affordable rent. How much would that be as a figure? Because I think that was different.
Okay, so Councillor Donnelly, if you want to come in, then we'll take one more after that.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of points. I think David's answered this, but I'll ask it directly. The issue around affordability partly revolves around preferential access for Ealing people to the properties. Are we confident that we have people with the demand locally is present for that commitment to have a meaning? I guess that's both for the London living rent properties and also the shared ownership properties. And the second part, and I don't know who's in a position to answer this, obviously one of the things that's addressed is that we have a normal expected distribution ratio of 60% social, and that we don't have this because it's 100% of intermediate products, but that we should, and the GLA permits us to take a broader view, look at a context and offset against the applicant's wider pan-London commitment to social housing. So in this case, MTVH, but looking through the paper, it would seem that a couple of points. Pan-London, the only reference is to them having 42% at social, from which I infer 42% social, 58% therefore I infer not social. And the other part of it there is it refers to a plan for 2,000 homes 2016 to 2021. Now, I know 2020 seemed like the longest year in history, but it is nearly over now. So we're very much at the back end of that 5-6 year plan. So there's no need, I think, for hypotheticals about what is going to be built in a 6-year period. So what have they actually built, and what do they propose to build 2021 onwards? Because we're not. I may or may not take a view as to the suitability, but I haven't been shown that at this point that MTVH offset this development with an overall approach, which is 60% social. Thanks, Chair. Councillor Rice, I think, is after me.
Okay, Councillor Rice, we'll take you, and then we'll go to the officers for an answer.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so first of all, if I could just ask about the blue badge parking. I am extremely concerned about the low ratio there. That really, in theory, if all the apartments that were suitable for disabled persons, for example, if they were all occupied, there wouldn't be adequate blue badge parking. I understand that the points that there are great improvements going on with public transport, with the new station. Although we're not really going to reach the highest levels of P-TEL rating, there's still someone who was in a wheelchair would still be quite heavily limited on the kind of transport and the kind of distances and the places where they could travel. So I'm just wondering if there is any chance that we could have another look at that and see if there's any way of expanding the blue badge parking. And also, if I can just ask about the Section 106 agreement, I'm just wondering about what conversations went on as regard the amount of money that's going towards health. It doesn't actually seem like an incredible amount of money, 120,000 for the numbers of persons and numbers of families who will be moving in. So if there's any chance that we could perhaps expand on that and see what would actually be the norm for that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rice, thank you. Could we go to the officers to answer the queries? And maybe David to sort out the housing affordability.
Okay. If I can capture these properly, I think Councillor Summers asked initially about the fast track route, which is it's part of the kind of affordable housing planning policy, which is supported by the GLA, which suggests that it's a nudge to any developer to help them to consider delivering affordable housing. And what that says is the minimum that anyone would expect is that 35% of those homes that have been delivered would be affordable housing. In this case, I think what we're saying is it's significantly over 35%. So therefore, the fast track route applies in terms of planning and viability. So they don't have to provide a set of figures, economic figures to the scheme to prove that point, because we're getting the housing that we ideally want, or at least we're on that road. The rents that I sort of broadly quoted were actually London affordable rents, which they would be, I think the more exact figure is for a one bed per month. London affordable rent would be £823. That includes that's including service charges. So like for like, London living rent would be touch over £900, 901 I think pounds. And for a two bed, £885 London affordable rent compared to £1,001 and £1. So the difference is at its maximum touch over £100 a month for a two bed, and around about £70 to £80 a month for a one bed. If I go on to, I think it was Councillor Donnelly asked about, I think we recognise this point in terms of access to housing. That would be controlled through the 106 and nomination agreement, which we would ensure that that's signed up to. So the borough would have direct access to nominate people, albeit they'd be in a different category. There would be both a need, but main need that they could afford to live in that accommodation. So we'd ensure that that was the case. I can't fully answer the Pan London point because that's probably the housing association, but they are working to a 2016 to 21 funding program from the GLA, and that program they would sign up to an agreement with the GLA to deliver the numbers that they've agreed to deliver. I think they're pretty hefty sanctions if you don't meet those targets.
I can report that in terms of progress to meet the target, Thames Valley, Housing Association are on track. I think they've got 1,800 units under construction on site, so they should be meeting their 2,000 home target. And in terms of the 850
affordable
social rent, sorry, social rent and London affordable rent, they've delivered that, from what I understand from the information from today. And that also includes schemes which are obviously being delivered in Ealing, and there's been mention of obviously the VHS scheme and the Goldsmith Arms scheme, which will deliver 91 London living rent units in the next, and yeah, that was all I was going to say on that.
Can we cover the issue of the disabled parking?
You're on mute, Katie.
Katie, you're mute.
Hi. Okay, so with regards to the disabled parking, so the London plan requirement is 3% at the outset of the development. So it would essentially, they would have, to comply with that aspect, they would have need to have provided 4 on-site parking spaces. So they are going to provide 3 on-street parking spaces that can be used by blue badge holders. And I guess the fact that the Crossrail station will be step-free access and does provide that alternative mode of transport for mobility impaired people, on balance, we consider it's acceptable, as does TfL.
So am I clear? They had to provide 4 and they're providing 3. Is that right?
Yes, 3% at the outset of the development.
Okay. All right. Who's next? Sorry, Steve. I can't see the chat. So
Chair, I think it was me, Councillor Blacker.
Okay, so back over to you.
If it's helpful for you to note them down, Chair, it's Councillors Anand, Woodruff, Raza and Wall next. Anand, Woodruff, Raza, Wall. No one else has yet indicated. I'd hoped that Councillor Donnelly's question on tenure mix would have been answered a bit better. It's interesting that they have delivered units elsewhere. We've had linked applications previously where we have approved, for instance, 100% private sale sites in order to deliver affordable units elsewhere, but those have been formally linked in the planning process, and the reports have always been clear that this is to be read alongside other reports. That's not the case on this application. So can we just clarify that we are not being asked to approve this alongside having approved the BHS site, for instance, but we're only looking at this in and of itself. So it's the tenure mix of this single application and not the MTVH portfolio of sites that they're all bringing forward as linked applications that we're being asked to assess. I suppose the other question that is, I think it was in the video we saw, there was a reference to a 10-year limit, I think, on the nominations rights. It may have in fact just been on the shared ownership element of it. Can someone just clarify that? Because I think I heard it in the video and wanted to know what that was. Finally, just to move on to design, so I think we've covered a lot of the kind of affordable housing things, and a lot of people's objections are on the fact of the building itself. The policy on tall buildings does talk about that they can be acceptable so long as they are an exemplar building. We've touched on the design reviews, but I mean, for me, it looks like a good quality building. How have officers assessed that it is a high quality building, and what kind of input have we had in terms of what that actually means? Because I think a lot of people's concerns is that it just looks a bit bland. That's all from me, Chair, for now. Sorry.
Okay. Councillor Anand. You're muted, Councillor Anand. Councillor Anand, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I have gone through the report. I find some good points in here, and I need some clarification on other points. The nomination agreement with the council for the accommodation is quite encouraging. The apprenticeship contribution is also very much encouraging. And I agree also that the site actually needs development. I pass it more or less 3-4 times a week. But there are concerns. My concerns start on page 35 of the report, the daylight and overshadowing of tall buildings. However small, there is notes on that report that actually suggest that certain buildings like the Argyle Corner and Castle Hill have been will be affected, and the Limousin I think court will be affected on page 35. Then further on, it goes about the quality of proposed living. Now, page 38, it reflects that there will be the quality of living here. I just need clarification because it says purge ventilation and residents will not be allowed to open their windows. Now, that's also very much concerned that the reasons that we're going high, but we're compromising on standards of living, although the report suggests that this will be covered and there will be conditions on that. And then I go on to page 40 of the report, the wind study. Now, again, the report suggests that there are issues and they will be addressed, but the concern is here the quality of living again, and the some balconies on the upper floors there will be no balconies because of the wind factor, and this is actually said quite clearly on page 40 of the report that it falls short. Then we go to further on, page 46 of the report, the energy and sustainability. Now, the report on its own on page 40 suggests that sorry, what page? Sorry, page 46. Sorry, 46. I'm saying 40 on my 46. I can't read my own handwriting. And you've got A and B. The applicant maintains that there is no space for roof PV. And then part B, the non-residential space must reduce CO2 emissions by at least 15% and is falling short to 12%. Then we're actually also talking about that same area will be used for children's amenities and under fives. But see, the whole report, however it's good and addressed the points, there are other parts of the report that suggest, oh, stage 2, there will be more clarification. I think those clarifications should have been presented to us on stage 1 when we're considering the application. Then going back to page 44 about, and I know that Councillor Rice has actually mentioned this, about the disabled parking. Now, again, the disabled parking, the report suggests on page 44 that there should be minimum of 5 parking spaces, not 4 as it was just said. It's 5, and we're actually offering 1 or now 3, but the 3 that you're offering will be on the main road or on the road, so it won't be for the residents. Any other person who with a blue badge will be able to park there unless the parking spaces are reserved for those particular car registration numbers. So these are points that I'm really much concerned within the report, and they are serious concerns, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Woodruff.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, we've had a huge amount of correspondence. I think an awful lot about it is the actual size of the building, really. I think it was mentioned that there is a building nearby with 13 stories. So I'm intrigued to know whether we tried to negotiate it down to 13 stories, and if not, why not? Or if it was impossible, why they wouldn't accept a sort of lower lower building, then I know we've already negotiated down a certain amount of stories, but just wondering if we couldn't have got nearer the 13 of the nearby buildings.
Okay. Can I go to officers now to clarify those points before I move on to the next two members asking questions?
Shall I start briefly with Councillor Blacker?
Yes.
Just to explain, I'll just explain about the 10-year limit, which is, like I said earlier, London Living Rent is a new form of tenure, and it's an intermediate tenure, so it's subsidised housing as a rent to sale product, as we call it. So there's a 10-year period whereby there will be a subsidised rent for the occupant. The idea is that they will be encouraged to save a deposit or save towards their next home, which could be the home that they're in or elsewhere. So that's a significant subsidy against what someone would pay in the private market. But there is a 10-year period after which there'd be a discussion, if it was the same tenant in there, and encouragement along the way that they make the appropriate savings.
Okay, thank you for that.
Chair, sorry, while Dave is there on that, if they leave the unit, does it then revert to a new 10-year period for a new tenant, or does it become a different tenure, that unit? So is the London Living Rent in perpetuity for the unit, or is it just for 10 years and then it reverts to a different tenure entirely?
Yeah, that's right. It's a 10-year limit, regardless of who's living there.
And sorry, and after that 10 years, what does it become? Does it become market rent, or does the developer then sell that unit?
I think the desire is that the occupant purchases that home, or it becomes available as for shared ownership to be purchased by somebody else. I mean, it's kind of a difficult point because no one has a desire to push anybody out of their home, but it does have a limit, and that would be made clear to the incoming tenant at the very beginning. And I think this housing association has a particularly careful approach to make sure that the occupants are fully aware of that, and they are encouraged. You can't force anybody, but they are encouraged to make savings, and I think there are likely to be regular yearly reviews of that.
Sorry, David, can I just check? Because in the report it says about how much people could save a month based on the low rent. Could you just talk us through that?
Yeah, I think based on a equivalent market rented home, so what you would pay if you were privately rented, there's something in the order of £250 a month that it would be discounted against that. So in theory, you should be saving a fairly hefty amount, or have the ability to.
Sorry, David, a week or a month?
A month.
Yeah. Okay, all right. And some of the other points, Alex, Katie?
I can address the points raised by Councillor Anand with regards to the proposed living accommodation. So I think I need to be clear that we are satisfied that it would provide a good quality standard of living. With respect to the windows, you can open the windows, so they do have trickle vents, and the windows are openable. So the reference where it says that they're non-opening, that was to do with the overheating assessment. So given that it is next to a railway track and it does have a high level of noise, the assessment of the overheating was done with the windows closed to make sure that the building would still be suitably cooled, that there would be enough comfort, thermal comfort, with the windows necessarily closed because it's noisy. So that is done through a mechanical ventilation and heat recovery system. The reason that there's no active cooling as well is because they're quite energy intensive. So to keep in line with the Mayor's energy hierarchy, we seek sort of passive methods of cooling first. It's a pretty standard way of cooling, or providing thermal comfort in a tall building. So there's no issues with that. With regards to the wind climate impacts, these principally relate to the detailed design of the roof terrace. So the roof terrace would provide a good comfort for people sitting and enjoying the roof garden, but it will come down to things like a canopy, the balustrading. That's going to be the balustrade details, things like that. So that can be dealt with in the detailed design stage. So we've got a condition requiring that detail, but at the outset we're very comfortable that can be very easily achieved. Energy and sustainability, that has been dealt with, so that the agent has clarified, I think updated in the members briefing, that the 15% reduction that the GLA sought, they're actually achieving an 18% reduction in carbon emissions. And we're also satisfied that they can't fit any PV panels on the roof. So one of the methods is they can still achieve the energy requirements, but without using PV panels. And that's principally because the roof is going to be used as a residential garden and also plant on the top roof. Disabled parking, I did say 4 before. It's 4.3. So I rounded it up in the committee report. So 4 or 5. That's the number of disabled parking that would be technically required by the London Plan. I discussed that earlier. And the last issue was sunlight and daylight impacts. So there's an addendum report to the Planning Committee report that goes into more detail. So there would be some variations from BRE standards for some neighbouring properties, principally, for example, the one directly across the road, Argyle Corner, the one on Castle Hill Road, and also the flatted development across on the southern side of the railway tracks. But when you look at the reasons why there's the departures, it is things like they're already restricted by their own extensions that are minimising impacts light to the windows. And also with regards to the Argyle Corner one directly across the road, those windows don't serve habitable rooms anyway. So the assessment's been done on the windows, and then I guess the justification as to why this isn't an impact. So overall, there is a very minor impact on any neighbouring properties that it is acceptable.
Okay. Any other issues that have been raised that we've not covered?
Councillor Woodruff asked about the heights of the buildings and whether we had wanted to negotiate a smaller building. Clearly, an application needs to be assessed on its merits once it's submitted. In terms of the original proposal, as you well know, it's well documented that the initial proposal was a taller building. Clearly, we negotiated a smaller building, and that landed on the building which you're seeing before you. In terms of other iterations, those discussions haven't taken place. For alternative proposals, we've negotiated the scheme as you see tonight. We do consider it to be high quality. The Councillor Blacker asked whether our view was whether it's exemplary or just good. We do feel that we don't feel it's bland, so sorry about that, but it actually is quite detailed, and I had hoped that level of detail would have come across in the photo montages. It is a simple palette of materials. It's light and it's brick facade, but there is careful detailing, which I think is appropriate for the site context, the site dimensions, etc. Just thinking if there's anything else.
No, I think you've probably covered.
That was it. Thanks.
We'll move to Councillor Razor. Councillor.
Yeah. A lot of what I had to ask has been asked before, so I won't repeat those. But one of my concerns is about vibration. So already in the area, when you talk to residents, they'll tell you that they have cracks in their properties, and that during the night and evenings when they have freight trains going through, the whole house shakes. And there is an issue that this is an existing problem. So compound that in an enormous tall building directly next to the train station. There was something in the report about vibrational studies, but there wasn't any extrapolation as to what that actually meant. So if you could shed some light on that, that would be great. Also, just adding to what Councillor Rice was asking about the health provision, we seem to get these schemes come up, and we have huge whopping amounts of money being given to health provision, and they disappear down a black hole and we never hear about them. I'm just referring to one scheme in Greenford where we had a promise of like a health hub and we were going to get more GP practices. None of this has actually materialized and nobody's talking about what's happening. So how does this pot of cash then translate into more GPs? Because I know for a fact that getting a GP appointment in this area is very difficult. I know it's not a planning matter, but it's an allied matter with what we're doing with our pot of cash. So if you could give me some kind of extra intel on that, that would be great. Also, children's play provision. I think that it's going to be a busy road, Manor Road, whether you like it or not. It's going to have a station on it. I know we live in a utopia where everybody walks and cycles, but in the real world, there's going to be traffic on the Argyle Road. It's certainly a conduit between the Uxbridge Road and the A40, and we all have a lot of traffic at most times of the day. So children, traffic, play areas, you're basically going to be sending them off towards Drayton Green or towards Dean Gardens, both of which mean crossing roads. So we need to make sure that those are safe. And is there a plan around that or not? Because we can't all pile into the roof garden. I did have one other thing, but it seems to have escaped me. So that'll do for now. Thank you.
Okay, just hold your... let me just get Councillor Wall in, and then we'll cover the issues. Councillor Wall?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Luckily enough, a lot of the questions that I wanted to ask have been asked already and dealt with, or at least partly answered. Couple of questions, or three questions, I think still. One is the single aspects. We have a new build, and yet we've got 66 out of 144 homes with single aspects. Why is that? And 13 of those are north facing, and I can kind of get that on a refurbishment, but not really on a new build. I just want to ask about the split of the income of the London living rent and the other tenure. In terms of the building itself, you've got kind of two halves to the building. Is that how the split of tenure is going to be? Or is it pepper potted around? And the last question that I think I haven't heard, well, it's not a last question actually, it's about the 10-year. So the 10-year thing is, well, I'll leave that to the debate, sorry, but the last question is, why haven't they given us under affordable rent? Specific question. If they can give it other places, why haven't they given it to us here?
Okay. So, David, do you want to do the housing bits and then we'll move to the others?
Oops. Yes. I'm just trying to pick up on the. I suppose it's the final point. Rather than how the building is split up, that might be one for.
Yeah, that'd be for Alex, yes.
To discuss. Why not London affordable rent? Well, we always start from the standpoint that this is what we want delivered, and I think what we are doing is both a practical and a policy approach. I mean, and I always look at schemes across the borough, and across the borough, we are as you know, the current administration has pushed hard to get more social rent, more genuinely affordable homes built, and they've set a target of 2,500 across the borough, and we are well on the way to achieving that by March 2022. That's something in the order of 60% there, and the majority of those homes, over 80%, are London affordable rent or social rent in one form or another. So I think overall and in the round, we're satisfied that there's been a significant push and significant response from all providers, including the council, to get more social rent homes built. And that will shortly be a matter of record.
Sorry, David, I get that, but yeah. I just don't understand why they haven't provided it on this development. Has that been asked of them and they've refused, or has it been asked?
Alex, maybe you can. You're muted, Alex.
Of course, it's been asked. We started that conversation right at the outset, but through the process, through the explanations about their product and what it would actually cost, and the overall amount that was coming forward within the scheme at 100%, those have all been factors that have been discussed in terms of securing the affordable housing. So we did start with that request. Of course, we would do that on all schemes, but this is ultimately what we have accepted to be a genuinely affordable, and it is because of the provision of the London living rent portion across, which will obviously deliver quite a significant number of units together with the shared ownership. I was just going to answer the question about pepper potting. Yes, the scheme would be completely pepper potted, tenure blind. There's no distinction, but where the units would be located across development. I think Katie can come back on the technical issues and the single aspect windows.
Okay, so since we're talking about Councillor Will's tenure blind one, I will stick with the north facing units. So on the northern elevation, there's three flats effectively that go along the northern elevation, and to make the most optimal use of the floor plate, the three flats are from right to left is the larger wheelchair housing unit, a one bed that complies with all the standards, and then a 3-bed unit on the far left. So essentially it's the middle flat. The middle flat that is the north facing units all the way up that floor plate. So that's how we come to the 9%. And that's effectively to make the most efficient use of the floor plate. You can't get any bigger than a 3-bed family unit on the left, so that has dual aspect, and then also the larger wheelchair housing on the right. So it made the best sense to have those units as the single aspect north facing ones. But that said, they do comply with internal floor space standards and amenity space standards, the private balcony areas, and also the other things like sunlight, daylight. For Councillor Reza with regards to the vibration, so this was assessed by the Pollution Technical Officer with regards to noise as well. So no issues were raised with vibration impacts, but that said, she has requested that another assessment to be done when full services remain post-COVID. So another, while we don't have any concerns that whatever issues based on the existing report that the scheme would provide good quality accommodation, just for that extra measure, they're going to do another assessment a little bit later. And then if there's any unthought of issues that are raised at that point, it will be dealt with through the mitigation measures that they'll propose. So there is no concern with regards to noise and vibration. With child's play provision, the roof the roof space, I guess, that's the play space equipment that's going to be on there is for the 0 to 5s. So they have focused on providing, I guess, the most vulnerable users in terms of road safety, the on-site provision. Of course, anyone can use the roof garden, but in terms of the play equipment that's going to be up there, it's going to be more suitable for 0 to 5. In terms of children going to parks in the wider area, there is quite a substantial amount of public realm and highways improvements that will be part of the complementary works of Crossrail, but also secured as part of this scheme. So we have secured money specifically for traffic calming measures on Manor Road, as well as improving footways and, say, for example, footway improvements on Manor Road from the development to Jacob's Ladder. So there's money as well to improve Jacob's Ladder and then a plaza on the other side. So we're improving the wider pedestrian links to various places and amenities that the road I just described is to St John's School as well. So it will deliver a lot of highways improvements that will make it safer for children to traverse and go to the places that they need to go to.
Sorry, can you just cover the health issues that Councillor Razor raised around the contribution and why she claims that it doesn't seem to translate into GPs, etc.? Could we just talk through how we work the process of getting a contribution towards health? Are you muted, Alex?
So in terms of the arriving at the financial contribution, there's normally a calculation based on the occupants of the development, and that's essentially what's been secured. In this particular case, you'll note from the officer's recommendation that we have required it to be within 1 mile radius of the development, and it lists obviously the local facilities within that kilometre. How that translates into doctors and extra provisions is entirely up to the healthcare. They will be provided the money as set out in any section 106, and how they put it towards their various projects in line with our section 106 requirements will be known later on. I can't honestly answer for the experiences of the other developments that Councillor Razor mentioned, and it may be that they haven't.
Can I just cut in? Sorry, Alex. It's just a case of, is there any way that you as planning talk to NHS as the healthcare providers to try and make sure that we can have some sort of sensible GP provision? That's basically the issue, is that there's no connect. It seems to be sort of, yeah, here's the cash and they go off and they do things about it. But is there some way where we can hold them to account over this and make sure that they provide some GP service?
We can certainly have those conversations, and I believe that they are undertaken. But in terms of the ultimate decisions, I think we can influence them. And that's all I can really say we can do. We don't necessarily do that at the planning stage. It can be done in terms of the allocation of the sums. It's certainly a takeaway for us to do, and I'm sure I can't answer all of the different aspects of that tonight, but it's certainly something I can note, and we can continue that conversation separately, because it's obviously going to be a global issue on all sorts of developments that the committee do see.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else raised any questions? Sorry, I can't see the chat.
You got
Yes,
Councillor Milliken.
Chair, it's Councillor Milliken.
Okay, Councillor Milliken, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I've a couple of questions about. Thanks so much, officers, for David and Sam, for answering questions. I'm sure you've answered many of the questions I would have liked to ask myself. But there's one area that hasn't been covered yet is Network Rail's objections. They are, of course, the very nearest neighbour, and they've raised some pretty serious objections. Now, you've covered them in the report, page 36 of the report, page 46 of 124. There are a number of them. One of them is the platform wall. The issues there about safety with people on the platform. Now, you've covered them there, but I'd really like some reassurance there. So I'd like to hear that. Obviously, there's a big issue of risk of falling objects onto the track and onto the platform. You've talked about children on the 15th floor. I'd like some reassurance on that. And then it talks about furniture's been moved, trees and so on have been moved. Now, clearly over time, and obviously trees don't move that much, but furniture does get moved over time. And this, presumably, this building is going to be here for some years, and the railway line is going to be there for some years. So I'd like some reassurance on that, because that potentially is quite a serious issue. And then there's another serious issue they've raised, is about the risk of solar glare coming down. Now, you've simply put in the report, the assessment, now on page 37, 47 and 124, this assessment concludes that reflections from the selected viewpoints would result in negligible or minor adverse instances of glare. Now, clearly Network Rail are concerned about that, and I think we should all be concerned about trains going through and the drivers being impacted by glare. So really the concerns of Network Rail, if you could answer some of those, please.
Okay. Who's going to take that?
I can take that. So with respect to Network Rail, so I've been in discussion with them, so they've seen my proposed conditions to address the concerns as well as the changes that have been made, and they've reviewed the committee report as well, this section specifically. So they no longer they no longer raise those objections. They have, in the briefing notes, they've recommended an additional condition, and that's pretty much with regards to the glare. It's just monitoring it over 12 months, and if there are any concerns that are raised, if they raise them, then they have to be mitigated by the development. So their concerns have been addressed. Yeah, specifically it is things like they've changed the windows. On the original submission, it had Juliet balconies on the side, and that was the main concern with objects being dropped onto the track. So they've altered them so that they're now winter gardens with bottom hung inward windows, inward opening windows, so that you're not going to accidentally drop anything out there onto the track. They do still have a concern with the deliberate throwing of objects onto the track. So part of that is they may need to put a canopy over the platform. So that can be dealt with. So in terms of the construction, the agent needs to secure an asset protection agreement with Network Rail. So that discussion on whether a platform canopy needs to be provided can be carried out during that process. So the developer's been engaged with Network Rail this whole time, and I have as well in the assessment of this application. So I'm confident, I'm certain that their concerns can be addressed and have been addressed.
Okay, thank you for your reassurance.
Okay, and any other questions before we move to debate? Oh,
yes, can I have one?
Yeah.
Could I ask about refuse and recycling, and how are all these 144 households going to be getting rid of their rubbish without is there an easy chute system? I didn't come across it when I read the report. It could be because I read it a couple of days ago, but yeah, if you could enlighten us about that, that would be brilliant.
Yes, so there isn't a chute system, so residents on their way leaving the building, they can access it's on the ground floor. So the refuse storage is on the ground floor, so they can access it from the lift lobby area. They go through a sort of sealed, a lobby to prevent smells escaping. So they do have direct access on the ground floor when they're leaving to put their refuse into the refuse storage area. In terms of capacity, that's all compliant with our standards. There is a sufficient number of refuse and recycling bins as well.
Okay, is that helpful, Teresa?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Is anybody else wanting to ask a question? No? Okay, then is anybody want to join the debate or want to make a contribution?
Well, I am, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Donnelly.
To start it off, maybe I'll keep an eye on who will follow me.
Please, that would be helpful.
And we can,
I'm so sorry, the chat doesn't seem to be working on my system.
I can pass the baton. Looks like Councillor Summers as it stands.
Okay.
Yeah, what? Because this clearly has, I don't know if the degree of public interest is unprecedented. I think the use of the electronic social media that we have now means that that the ability to participate through, I guess, a very modern form of petitions means that we probably haven't had these kinds of numbers objecting, emailing councillors, and all the rest. And there's no question that some of the information that's been sent through to us has been very helpful. It's been thought through. A lot of hard work's been done by people who have engaged wholeheartedly in the campaign. If I've found some of the many hundreds of emails I've had less pleasing, I guess it's been because references to, you know, how can I vote for you and all the rest depress me as someone who's committed to representative democracy, because in the same way that I wouldn't be induced to vote other than the way I think is right, neither I think should I be threatened in any particular way. And clearly it's not going to affect my ultimate decision this evening, but I think there are better ways in which we can communicate with each other. Moving on to where we stand, I mean, it seems to me this is a classic case of showing how, as a planning authority, we walk on an uneven and shifting pavement. We have to navigate within a current local plan, a developing local plan, a current London plan, a revised London plan that would already be published and in operation were it not be for the fact that the government is playing political games with the current mayor and seeking to undermine his authority at every turn. So we're left with the new London plan that with the intention to publish, and we have to take account of what all of these things currently say and what these things are likely to say in the future. We are bound to do those things. We're bound to hold what sometimes, I think from the outside, must seem a variety of contradictory things in mind, and yet satisfy them all. We are, as members of the committee, we've been favoured with the legal's opinion from two legal counsel, giving us opposite opinions, and these counsels, these barristers operate within the same legal chambers, which I think, you know, one can talk for hours about what that might demonstrate, but I think it demonstrates that there isn't clarity about the outcome of this. And I guess moving on to the specifics, the one thing I'd say is unfair in criticism that's been made of this proposal is the idea there is, I think, monstrosity is a word that one high profile person has used about it. I don't see how that can be said. One might not like the proposal, one might think it's in the wrong place, one might think it has the wrong people in it, paying the wrong sort of rents or the wrong sort of money. But it's not by any stretch of the imagination amongst the ugliest buildings that we've seen. And I think given the constraints of the footprint, it's been quite intelligently planned. So I think this all comes down in the end to the statement which is made near the beginning of the report and is repeated later, which is about how we assess the balance between the report in principle failing to conform with our plan and the approach we take to the affordable housing element of the application, and whether or not that is a sufficiently material factor to enable us to put aside what would otherwise be our decision. Now, I don't intend to get into a debate about what constitutes affordable with a capital A. These products, such as London Living Rent and shared ownership, are out there. They are widely accepted, and certainly widely accepted in the London context. And we will accept them as affordable with a capital A. And the question I asked earlier was really to get to the bottom of, and I took my question to be answered, though it wasn't explicitly, that we have people in our borough who will welcome and will be able to afford the products that are on offer within this development. So it's therefore down to, can we accept that it's a 100% intermediate model? Well, the GLA indicates to us that there are circumstances in which that can be done. Does this fall within those circumstances? Well, that's why I asked the question about this particular developer and the Pan London model, and whether or to what degree they seek to emulate or achieve the 60% social rent. And again, possibly I didn't get perhaps as decisive an answer on that as I might have wanted. There's no doubt, I think, that in the end, the Mayor of London will decide whether or not this building appears in the shape that it's in, with the occupants that are proposed. Whatever we decide tonight, I think ultimately the Mayor of London will decide it. I thought one of the things about the report I thought was really first rate was the computer aided design showed us some absolutely excellent pictures, which enabled us to get a vision not only of the building as it is proposed, but what it would look like in my mind were it slightly smaller. And it struck me that one thing that was clear was that making this building slightly smaller, slightly less tall, would have no substantive impact at all. And that really, in order to address the sorts of concerns that have been raised by the objectors and campaigners, this building would have to be probably not much more than half the height that is proposed. And in those circumstances, of course, we're not talking about tinkering at the edges. We're talking about an entirely different development, and probably a development with an entirely different profile of occupants. So I'm going to take the risk tonight of making nobody goes into planning for the purposes, I think, of making themselves popular. But I'm going to take the risk of making myself perhaps the most unpopular by saying that in terms of my reading of all of the paperwork that I've had and listening to the debate and answering the questions, at this point in the discussion, I'll be minded to support the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor John. Councillor Summers?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just for your note, Councillor Raza, Councillor Milliken, Councillor Woodruff, Councillor Anand and Councillor Rice want to speak after me.
So just say that again, sorry.
Yeah, Raza, Milliken, Woodruff, Anand and Rice.
Thank you.
Firstly, I'm prepared to put on record that I do not have a problem with the height of this tower. At this point, I imagine there would be a lot of boos and heckles from the public gallery if we were meeting in the council chamber. But as Councillor Donnelly says, the planning committee is not a popularity contest. I think it makes absolute sense to concentrate new housing developments as close as possible to public transport. And this site is right next door to a Crossrail station, which will be open, even though there have been delays, before these flats are completed. There are a number of high-rise buildings in the immediate vicinity, Luminosity Court, Dominion House, and a 14-storey block not yet built. I also don't accept that this tower is a monstrosity or an eyesore. I believe it would actually improve the area, which is currently a sort of row of scruffy shops and an area where cars sort of unofficially park on the pavement. And I'm saying this as, you know, I am a councillor from Northolt, and I'm aware that a lot of the people listening, or a lot of those who have written in, would say, well, you're not local, you know, you wouldn't say that if it was in Northolt. I would actually. Northolt Station has got a site right next to it, which is primed for development, and I personally would have no problem having a tower similar to this on that site, right next to a central line station. But having said all that, I do still have a problem with this application in its current format. There's obviously been an enormous amount of objection, 2,500 names on a petition, and probably almost as many emails. So if we are to build a tower of this size, which is clearly not going to be very popular when it is constructed, or if it is constructed, then it does need to deliver some truly affordable housing, genuinely affordable housing. And the tenure mix which is offered simply doesn't do that. I personally would prefer that, you know, private, you know, if the viability means that they have to put in some private flats to fund affordable flats, genuinely affordable flats, I'd rather see that. I'd rather see 50% private flats, and, you know, as much as possible London affordable rent. I'm a bit bemused, I must say, by the figures which we've been given about the London affordable rent, because I've looked up, it's a cabinet report from 2018, which gave an example of a one-bed home, which said private rent, London living rent £912, London affordable rent £650. So clear, you know, from my understanding, London affordable rent is a lot more affordable. We've heard talk about, you know, households with two people on an income. But that's my point. A lot of the people that come into our surgeries and need housing and are on the housing waiting list are not classic two-parent families, both in employment. They are single parents, some of them, you know, in part-time or no employment at all, who are you know, struggling and would not be able to afford London living rent at all. And I think it's quite telling that one of the people who's spoken tonight and has written a letter is Mr. Murray, the MP, who is former deputy mayor of housing in London. I mean, if he says that this tenure mix is not right, then, you know, surely we should be listening to that. I cannot in conscience support this scheme as it is, but what I'm actually asking for at this stage is for it to be deferred, so that MVTH could crunch the numbers again and offer a different tenure mix with much more, well, at the moment there isn't any, in my opinion, more genuinely affordable accommodation, and that's why I'm currently I'm currently thinking of voting against, but I would like for us to consider deferral.
Okay, I've had a motion for deferral. Do I have a seconder for that?
Yeah, I'll second it, Shital.
Okay, so we have I do now need to move to a vote on this motion. So can I first of all confirm that all members have been present for the entirety of this item? Nobody was, okay. All right, so this is a straightforward deferral vote. So can I go to Councillor Shabazz Ahmed? Councillor Ahmed, are you for deferral or against?
I'm against deferral, Chair.
Councillor Anand, are you for or against deferral?
Against.
Councillor Blacker, are you for or against deferral?
Against, Chair.
Councillor Busuttil, are you for or against deferral?
For deferral, please.
For, okay. Councillor Donnelly, are you for or against?
Against.
Against. Councillor Milliken, are you for or against?
I'm against deferral.
Councillor Raza, are you for or against deferral? Councillor Raza?
For.
Councillor Rice, are you for or against?
Against. Thank you.
Councillor Summers? Oh yeah, you're for. Apologies. Yeah. Councillor Sumner, are you for or against?
I'm against deferral.
Okay. And Councillor Wall?
I'll be for a deferral, Chair.
And Councillor Woodruff, I assume you're for because you've
Yeah, correct.
And I would be voting against, so it's clearly lost. So can we now move on to the next person on the list? Councillor Razor.
Hi, yes. So many of these schemes for tall buildings and sort of stack 'em high schemes come before us. And we seem to forget that what we're trying to do is build communities, not just bricks and mortar. These are people, families, and as Councillor Summer said, these are often sort of families who really need accommodation and really need it at a price that they can afford. And so there's so many things with this scheme that I would dearly love to be able to say, yeah, great, this is fabulous. But that as a local, as a person who literally lives round the corner from where it's due to happen, this, I'm afraid I fully agree with all of those people who wrote in to say that this was too high. It's to if it was half the size and if it came in similarly to the buildings that are around it, then it would be there would be no problems in passing this and in supporting it. I'm sure a lot of the residents would actually be delighted that something nice was going to happen in that block. But unfortunately, we are where we are, and this, in its present plan that's presented before us tonight, is twice as high as it ought to be. Also, I think the tenure mix, as Councillor Summers also pointed out, I have a real issue with that. I fully welcome the fact that key workers have been thought of in this, which is brilliant, and that local people have been thought of in this mix as well. But it just doesn't hit that spot where we have so many people who really need this accommodation are not going to be getting it. This still sort of is very niche as to who it's aimed at. So I have some reservations about that. But on the whole, the whole thing kind of doesn't gel with the community that's here already. This sort of, we land these schemes on people and expect them to welcome them with open arms. I think that kind of discussion to be had with people who live here already, in the community that live here already, hasn't really been taking place in a very positive way, which is why planning is always seen as like some kind of thing that you come to do battle with instead of actually work with us. So we should actually be asking for opinions to come forward when we think about doing planning for a particular site. And I'd like to see a bit more interaction on that, a bit more comms on that. So yes, I'm afraid I'm minded to not support this scheme. It really is out of order. Somewhere else, this building, I have no problems with the design. I think it's actually very thoughtful. I love the fact that there's brickwork. I love the fact that there is some thought being given to green space on the roof, and also these winter garden situations, and also with balconies. But somewhere else, for this site, it's too big and it's out of context, and it really doesn't do anything for the local community.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Milliken?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Appreciate the time to speak today. Yes, I mean, I think probably many of us accept that this is a site that would benefit from development. You know, goodness me, I know the site extremely well. I guess most of us on the committee. I mean, it really does need development, and we do need the housing too. So I accept both of those. But I do think it does have to be sympathetic to the local community. It has to fit in. Now, the officer's report, and I'm on page 23, and I'm quoting straight from it, the scheme has to be developed, has been developed as a landmark building. Now, I'm just not sure quite why we need, you know, what landmark is needed here in this community. I just can't get my mind around that. This community, the landmark of this building would not be part of the community. It's almost as Councillor Razor was saying a moment ago, it is out of keeping. So where this landmark building idea comes from, I'm not sure. It's out there, mostly Edwardian properties, as we've heard, the terraced houses, 2-storey, and then along the main road 3- and 4-storey. It's completely out of keeping with the locally listed sorting office directly across the road, Drayton Court Hotel, the parade of shops on the avenue. These are all Stoll's Corner, the cafe or restaurant that it now is directly facing you as you come over from the station. It is out of keeping with those. Now, I mean, it might be a good design on its own, and you know, I won't form judgment on that, but it is not the right design for the area where it is. The height of the building too, I think, it again is out of keeping. We keep hearing it's part of the Metropolitan Town Centre. I mean, I have to say, this is some distance from what you and I would think of as the town centre of Ealing, and even from West Ealing too. It's the other side of the railway line. The Luminosity site on the Waitrose site it depends how you count it, 8 or 9 stories. It's this is double the size of that. Dominion House on the other side of the avenue, it's pretty well double the size of that. So the report is almost kind of justifying the tall buildings nearby. Because there are tall buildings nearby, this is acceptable. And I just don't, this is a whole new order of magnitude. So I mean, I also have concerns about the amount of social rented property there. Others have spoken more fluently than me on that, so I won't add to that, but I certainly have the concerns that Councillor Summers has there. I have to say, I know my Ealing Broadway colleagues have expressed objections too. They are literally across the road, Ealing Broadway residents. In fact, I think my boundaries are right where the avenue is Ealing Broadway, and I know my colleague Councillor Sumar wrote to everybody earlier expressing that. So put bluntly, I'm struggling with this, as you probably realise. I think it would unacceptably change the character of the neighbourhood. I really do. I think it would. So unless I hear anything to the contrary in the rest of this debate, I shall be voting against it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Woodruff.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think I'd like to preface by say, I mean, there's been a huge amount of correspondence we've had. I think my emails got over nearly 300 emails. I think a lot of it, the language has been, I mean, quite often the language is seriously offensive, not to mention intimidatory. And I think that quite often has a reverse result. I think most of us have been in planning a long time, and councillors, and words like that really are more likely to produce a reverse result. I've got no problems with tall buildings per se, because there's a tall one being built in my actual ward at the moment, and I've supported that for quite a while. But I do kind of think that this building, like David Milliken, I'm struggling with this quite a lot. I mean, I think I have a problem with the size, the tall size of the building itself in that particular area, where I have a feeling it could well provide a precedent, and also the intermediate nature of the affordable housing. I would have preferred some more proper social housing. So I'm still not entirely sure the way I'm going to vote. So I'll hear some other people, but I do have problems about this particular application.
Thank you. Councillor Anand.
Thank you, Chair. I must add for the record to the public. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, we can.
I come to the planning committee. I come with an open mind. We read the material that's sent to us. We go through that. We hear what is said to us. We hear everything. It's a lot of hard work has gone in these emails, and I think it was overdone. Getting so many emails, it's heartfelt because people are talking about tall buildings. The fact is that it was a hard sell. When we talk about this particular campaign with the residents, it was a hard sell. It was some way close to intimidation. We had for the record, the public who may not know, we had a debate yesterday on tall buildings. The planning committee members from the Labour Party and I think from the Lib Dems did not take part in that debate. We come with an open mind. I'm not against tall buildings. In fact, if you knew where I lived, if I come out my house, I've got a whole stretch of tall buildings in North Acton. But that's how it is. Currently, I feel that this particular building, I haven't made up my mind yet. I'm still ready to hear more what's said in the meeting. But currently, I feel that this particular building is out of character to the rest of the community. We must also see what the community wants. I accept that the key workers element is there and there's going to be housing. However, I don't want to go over the tenanture mix because that's been discussed very well already. But the fact is that we got to assess everything, and currently I'm still in two minds on which way I'm going to vote. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so because as same as Councillor Raza was saying earlier about receiving materials through a front door, I also receive materials from Stop the Towers. I was actually going through that, and I will say this as someone who doesn't actually live in the area, but actually that part of my ceiling has been central to my social life and my work in the community and my political life since 1996. So it is an area that's very dear to me. What I just will say is that in that material from Stop the Towers, it did seem to imply that these new residents that be coming into the flats would somehow infringe upon the community life, infringe upon the street parties and the community spirit in some way, which I just found very difficult, because I thought, well, I just thought, why can't we just simply look at in a very positive sense about these new residents coming in and what they will actually add to that community, add to those street parties, add to the community life, add to the spirit and maybe the voluntary work, and actually making the place an even better place than it already is. So it's just, so I would actually just like to make sure that we do think about these people and what they're actually going to contribute, and that's where I'm really thinking at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Is anybody else wanting to speak, indicating?
Yes, Chair, it's Councillor Basutil here. I think there's Councillor Wall after me and Councillor Sumner who would like to speak after me also, and Councillor Blacker, just to add to your list there.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Basutil, you're next.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. The development itself, the structure, the building, I've got no problem with. I don't even really have a problem with the height. If you have a look at the diagrams earlier from, I think, Katie or Alex had shown, is that the height of the building has actually come down of what it was originally going to be in the first place. Now, Councillor Donnelly had said something earlier about it didn't come onto planning to be popular, and that's kind of the same for me. I came onto the planning committee because one, I enjoy it, but two is a few years ago I was in a situation where I thought that I wasn't going to be able to buy my own place in the borough that I live and represent. And one of the reasons why I came onto the planning committee, or the biggest reason I came onto the planning committee, was the fact that I wanted people, particularly young people, to have the opportunity to afford to live in this borough and buy their own place. I feel that buying your own place has a stake in the community. But this is where the I find I'm in a bit of a bind, because as a person that has a shared ownership place myself, I find the page 100 on 124 of the report a bit disingenuous about affordability. I will say that shared ownership does get people onto the housing ladder, but it's not a fantastic scheme. It's an all right scheme. But when it comes to affordability, it's not as affordable as what people may think. Now, to afford a property under a shared ownership scheme, even at 25%, which is the lowest percent, you will need either a high income, I mean 45, 50, 60 plus, or a high deposit. And that's where the conundrum is that shared ownership may be perceived as affordable, but it's actually still quite as difficult. And somebody who's on a lower income, I mean, my income is, I would say, above average, and I'm lucky, but someone who's on a lower income of, say, 25,000, I can safely say, unless they've got a large deposit, they've got no hope in chance of getting a shared ownership place. And that's bearing in mind that nobody has any debts. So that's where my issue is with the development, and it's been talked about quite a lot tonight in this committee, particularly at the beginning. Now, I'm quite sure whatever we vote tonight, whether we vote to approve or reject this application, it will be decided ultimately at the GLA level. And I, as well as all the councillors here, have received a huge number of emails and material through the post about rejecting this application. And I'd like to say to those people is that I suggest, no matter what we vote here, we'll go to GLA, so you need to take your fire to the GLA. So that's where I'm at with this application. I've got no problem with the building per se, but I do have a problem with the mix of tenure that this application offers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ward?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I won't repeat what a lot of people have said, and I'm probably well, I came to this late, so I've read this quite quickly, and I'm still, I came in 50-50 and I haven't veered from that. Well, I have veered back and forward, and I'm still at a 50-50 part of this, because for me it's the departure from policy. Is the affordability level high enough or not? The London affordable rent is what we should, I think, be going for. We've got London living rent, which is a model that we don't really know where it's going to go. We know that after 10 years, if you haven't got enough for a deposit, either in this development or another development, you are basically, well, we don't know is the answer, but we think that they might be evicted. And I don't think that's a good model, to be quite honest. However, and many people have heard me say this before, tall buildings, I've got nothing against tall buildings, and I've seen that this one has come down substantially in size from first muted. So I'll just shut up at that point, Chair, because I really don't know which way I'm going to vote at this point in time.
Okay, Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chair. The site is compact. The scale, height, massing and density are totally inappropriate. The proposed tower block would dominate the existing Victorian building, streetscape and the wider hinterland. We've had important contributions this evening from Nicholas Grant and from Councillor Linda Burke and James Murray MP and Councillor Raza. I thought that was very important contribution there. So I'm going to tell you there that I have listened to the arguments regarding climate change, and I believe that this development will have a huge carbon footprint and not comply with the Council's sustainability policies. So, Chair, I'm minded to support that this development application should be rejected outright. And thank you for listening.
Okay, Councillor Blacker.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I've delayed getting my mouse onto the unmute button. Like many others, I've struggled with this because this is not a development that conforms wholly to the plan. But if it was, it wouldn't be a committee. And this is literally why we are here, to do it. And I think, Katie, thank you for all the work in that report. It's very comprehensive, and actually the briefing note even more helpful, particularly the clarity on which policies are in conflict and which it complies with. Actually makes it very helpful just to set out those issues. So I mean, I think I always give feedback on how reports could be improved, and perhaps that's my feedback for this meeting, is that kind of real clarity in where we are on which policies is helpful and supported. A lot of my thinking has been mentioned. A couple of things I want to come back on people's contributions and just clarify where we are and what we can and can't do. I totally understand the points about shared ownership. I agree with them all. It is not an affordable product in the sense that most people would agree. I don't think that it's sustainable in the way that it's evolved in the last kind of 10 years, but it is affordable. We are told it is affordable by the government in the National Planning Policy Framework. We can't say that it is not affordable because it technically and legally is affordable. We are bound by that as much as we would, I think, like from the contributions to not to be bound by it, but we are bound by it. The scale and massing is totally out of context. Absolutely agreed. Luminosity Court, the one along the railway to the east, the 13-storey block, those are all much smaller scale. They are, I think, much more sympathetic to the area. They step up towards the railway and they respond to the particular context of their site. They're graduated heights. They're not a single massive tower. The one next to the Drayton Court is 6 stories at Drayton Court, and then it only steps up to a 13 right on the corner. This obviously is a very different shaped site. It has a very different site context with where it is on that little strip of land. And, if you were asking me to design a building, I probably wouldn't have gone straight to that. However, that said, the report is quite clear that the stage 1 response from the GLA is that the scale and massing is acceptable to them. We are expected to densify near transport hubs, particularly Crossrail, and this is doing that. And I think it would certainly dominate in the local area. I think some of the views are very helpful, that it's not quite as dominant from some of the longer views, which is only to be expected. It certainly would dominate locally, as Councillor Sumner says. But that's not really putting a new big building in is not that would change the area is not a reason to refuse, unless it is so awful that it would, create such harm. Alex, we can argue as to whether it's very high quality, or simply very good. Your interpretation of the architecture is different from mine, and I accept that. Some of the repetition I don't like, and I don't like some of the lines of the building, but that's a very personal thing, and it's not good enough to say no. So where am I, Chair? I don't think, given the constraints we've got, particularly, and I think again in the briefing note references to permissions given by Secretary of State and inspectors in terms of the weight they've afforded to the amount of affordable housing in a development. I don't think we have the valid planning reasons to reject this now and successfully defend that rejection, given what the GLA have said, given the affordable offer. I would quite like to reject it, but that's not enough in planning terms to do it, Chair. So I think where I am is, I think at the moment I'm minded to support, unless someone can convince me otherwise before you go to a vote.
Okay. Is anybody else indicated? Sorry, Councillor Blacker. Is anybody else indicated? No. Alex, do you want to just come back and address some of the points before I sum up? Hello, are you muted, Alex?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure which particular points
I don't know whether
should come back
you
on.
wanted to make a contribution on some of the points that have been raised, especially around, I think it's around this London shared ownership, because a couple of councillors in fact, Councillor Busuttil says he lives in a shared ownership and yet thinks it's not affordable. So I just wondered whether we could just maybe get David to come back and just talk about who can actually afford the shared ownership products, because I think it's quite important that we bottom out, the shared ownership. Is that possible?
I can offer some words on it. I mean, some of this is historical, shared ownership, and I've been in the housing movement for 35 years. And I remember when shared ownership first came on the scene, and it was totally appropriate because, quite crudely, property prices were much cheaper. So anywhere you cut it, it was a pretty good deal. In London, in particular, fast forwarding, then the prices in London are not cheap. So shared ownership works hard to make sure that there is some accessibility to home ownership. And it's a struggle, because if you leap from a subsidized, either rented or sale tenure to open market, it's a huge leap, and there's a huge debate out there. So I think when people say that shared ownership is not affordable, there are some rights to that, but there are big numbers across London of people who are accessing shared ownership as sometimes the only choice they have, but sometimes a chosen choice. It's not top on the list in terms of a genuinely affordable home, as our own administration have stated, but it is in the umbrella of the affordable choices. I'd like to just clarify one point that Councillor Sumner has raised about the difference between London affordable rent and London living rent. The main difference there is London affordable rent doesn't include service charges. So when you add in service charges and then you take on board London living rent, which is determined per ward, on a local level, then in some places they are extremely close in the price. In other places there's more of a differential. But service charges, which are deemed here to be something like £30 or £35 a week, make a big difference. And London living rent includes service charges, so there's always an estimate of what that that will cost. So yes, in terms of accessibility, both are accessible to, and they're often compared to social workers, teachers, nurses, and the like, and a range of other key workers, bus drivers, and like. Those are the salaries that these products, I'm afraid calling them products, but they're known in the industry, are compared with, and there are high numbers of these types of household who access this type of tenure.
Okay, that's helpful. Alex, did you want to say anything before I move to summing up?
I don't think so, because obviously a number of the other comments are in relation to the design and the height, and I think there's been quite a lot of discussion about about that this evening, and there's clearly a dispute between whether something is in character or not, or whether it's high quality or not. So I don't think there's any need for us to add anything extra. I think clearly our recommendation is that we do consider it to be appropriate, and we don't consider it to impact negatively on the character of the area. Care and attention has been taken to look at the context, and we have concluded that the height in this particular on this particular site next to the Crossrail station is appropriate, but obviously there's a range of views on that. I think I'll probably leave it there and leave you to.
Yeah. Can I first of all say I think this has been one of the most, well, I don't want controversial, but it has been one where people have shown a lot of interest from Save, Stop the Towers, etc., and many emails. And I think, as some of the committee have already indicated, sometimes it is a negative, because the planning committee is there to follow what is national planning policy, the London plan, and our local plan, and there's a hierarchy. So the national plan overrides the London plan, and the London plan overrides our local plan. So the planning committee is not free to make any decision it wants. It needs to follow planning policies as laid out. And yes, there is some room for maneuver in terms of us making a judgment, but the judgment has to be based on proper planning grounds. Now, this, I think, really, as Councillor Donnelly and Councillor Blacker have indicated, that some of the emails have been downright rude, intimidatory, not actually understanding the role of the planning committee. We are not free agents to do whatever they want us to do. We have to follow planning policy. Now, I've heard the debate tonight, and I've heard many members of the committee raise different issues, but what I would say to the planning committee is, when you vote, please think about what planning reasons you would want to give to me, the chair, and the planning officers, for us to maybe be able to try and defend any decision that we make. It's not good enough to say that. You have to be able to articulate real planning reasons why you think this doesn't work, and that's in all sort of cases. So
can I ask a question, Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just on that point. As I said in my speech, I don't have an issue with the height of the towers. My only issue is with the mixed tenure. Is that in itself a reason for rejection, or would it have to go in with other councillors' objections to the height, etc.?
Well, it would have to go in, but Councillor Summers, what I would say to you is, by definition of national planning policy and London plan, this is a 100% affordable offer by their definition. So I'm not sure that your definition of not affordable would count, because legally it is defined, I think the officers would correct me if I'm wrong, but legally it would be defined as being a 100% affordable offer, which we've turned down, and they would then go to appeal on that basis. And we wouldn't be able to argue that it wasn't affordable because in legal terms it is. I think, Alex, is that right? Am I wrong? Sorry, Alex, you're muted. Sorry, you need to unmute yourself. Yeah, okay. No, you're still muted. Now you're okay.
Yeah, sorry. I was just trying to follow what you were saying. In relation to obviously the affordable, I mean, that would be ultimately to you to make that decision. Obviously, you've got the context of the development plan, obviously the London plan as well, and even clearly between all of those, and the planning committee have seen in other cases there are obviously differences between what the various plans expect to secure. So it will be entirely up to you to make that decision.
Okay.
I think we've set out the case. You know, technically speaking, it can be a reason for refusal. It doesn't need to be a reason. You know, it can be a standalone reason for refusal in a technical sense. But there are many factors that you would need to take into account, I would suggest.
Okay, so I think that's my view as chair, that it would be very hard to defend in terms of affordability, because 35% of the units are London living rent, so they meet the fast track criteria, and the shared ownership are usually classified as affordable. So you need to bear that in mind, Councillor Summers. Basically, I think people have to reach a decision. It's always difficult when there's undue pressure put on planning committee, and I think some of the emails have verged on completely outrageous in what they've said. I mean, one of the lines that have been laid out is that the GLA is wanting to refuse this, and as we as planning committee understand clearly, if the GLA is not happy with any application, they have the ability to say no. So this would go to the GLA at stage 2 if we were to say yes. And if they were truly right in what the objectors are saying, that the GLA is not happy with this application, the GLA would just say no. And I think some of the propaganda that's put in some of those emails is led to confuse. The GLA hasn't indicated that they're against it. At stage 1, they've indicated they're generally happy with massing, etc., and it's in the report. So I think members need to bear that in mind as well. But I'm not going to continue with this. I think people have heard the debate, have seen what's on offer, and I'm going to now move to the vote. So again, I need to just go through a couple of tests. Have all members been entirely present during this item? Please let me know if you've fallen out and then come back in. No? Okay. So there are no amendments. Can I check with the DSO that everything is clear?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I move to the vote. Councillor Ahmed, are you for, against, or abstaining?
Chair, I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Praveen Anand.
Chair, I abstain.
Councillor Josh Blacker.
For, Chair.
Councillor Gary Bestertil.
I'm against, Chair.
Councillor Stephen Donnelly.
For, Chair.
Councillor David Milliken.
I'm against.
Councillor Aisha Razor.
Against.
Councillor Miriam Rice.
For.
Councillor Chris Summers.
Reluctantly against.
Councillor Nigel Sumner.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Ray Wall.
Can you hear me? I'm abstaining, Chair.
Councillor Simon Woodruff.
Again, against.
So we have without my vote, we have 4 for and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against. So clearly lost 6-4. I'm going to not take no, I should make it clear. I would be voting for, so it would be lost on 6-5. So this application is lost. Now, the members who have indicated against, I need to hear planning reasons for refusal. So could I please ask members who voted against to clearly articulate their planning reasons for why they wish to vote against?
Well, should I kick off? I mean,
yes.
There are two reasons. One, I think it is too large for that particular area, and I also think there should be much greater amount of social affordability rather than just the intermediate. I don't think there's enough genuine affordability.
So this is overdevelopment and not good enough.
Yes.
Somebody's got their mic on. Oops. Okay.
Councillor Manro, it's David Milliken here.
Yeah.
I think it's out of keeping, out of character with the neighbourhood. I don't think it's sympathetic to the local community. That will be my principal reason against it. But I have concerns about the affordable properties as well. And I think there should be a higher proportion of social, well, there should be some social rent provision there as well. So my principal reason is that it is out of character with the neighbourhood.
Okay.
I think that it's an overdevelopment of the site. It's out of keeping with the area. It's out of context with what's around it. There's insufficient play area. There's the density, I believe, exceeds the London plan, or the one that's in process of coming out. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'm not too happy with the tenure mix either. I think it's not really affordable.
Okay. Anybody else got any new reasons rather than the same reasons? Okay. Will the committee leave it to me and Alex to put any other reasons that we may need to put in? Is that acceptable?
Yes, that's acceptable.
Yes, that's fine.
Agreed.
Fine.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. So I think we've come to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much for your participation and a very, very coherent debate. Hopefully members of the public now understand clearly how planning committees have to work and have to manage some of these very controversial projects. Thank you very much, and I think that will be the end of the meeting. So we'll have another planning meeting, I think, on the 18th of November. But thank you and good night.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very
Thank
kind.
you.
Chair.
Ending the meeting.
Yes. Thank you.